This is hi, welcome to the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee meeting on August 15th at 4:31 p.m. So welcome. I guess we'll do roll call. Laura, you want to take that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Jeff Alves.
Here.
Amy Armsby.
Here.
Sarah Doherty. Eric Doyle. Bill Kelly. Ann Koffsill.
Here.
Andrew Pierce.
Here.
Al Sill.
Here.
Nicholas Targ.
Yeah.
Bob Turcott.
Here.
Janie Ward.
Here.
Sarah Wernikoff.
Here.
Helen Walter. And Chair Jocelyn MacArthur.
Here. All right. So we'll go to the oral communications. So people wishing to address the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee on any subject not on the agenda may do so now. Please note, however, that the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee is not able to undertake extended discussion or action tonight on items not on the agenda. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. And I'm looking over, we have, I guess 18 people from our town participating. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our meeting. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make on items not on the agenda? It's a limited list because we're really talking about the whole housing element tonight. So Christy Corley, not on the agenda, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I was just reading what San Rafael is doing, and their SB 9 ordinance says if no off-street parking was required in hillside neighborhoods and high fire zones, it could become a safety concern with more cars on the streets. So they have a parking requirement in the city. One off-street parking space per resident will also be required unless, as required by SB 9, the lot is within a half mile of transit corridor or a major transit stop, or within a car share site, which is the SB 9 requirements. So parking requirement in this city would be limited only to a few streets and a chunk of East San Rafael. So I'm wondering what our town is doing as far as on-street parking versus off-street parking for ADUs. And I'm wondering if you could discuss that later. Also, what is our requirement for fire hydrants? Do they have to be 400 feet apart from each other? What is our requirement compared to theirs? So if cars are clogged on the streets, our evacuation on the streets becomes an issue, and that is a concern of mine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Any comments on items not on the agenda? Nope. Okay. All right, so we're going to move to the meat of our discussion. And I think tonight we might go on record for the shortest Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee meeting. Now, I've said this once before.
Jinx it.
Said it once before, and it was, you know, the 10-hour meeting. So, but I think tonight looks like we're going to have a pretty short meeting. So, all right, Laura, take it away. It's all in your hands. Okay.
Great. Thanks. Just a second. Let me share my screen.
I want to thank everybody for joining in the middle of the summer too. I know people are busy.
I hope people have been having fun with their summer. Everyone deserves to go out and have a little bit of fun. So does that look okay to everyone?
Yes.
Great. Thanks. Good afternoon. This committee went on a little break, but we're here really to provide you some updates. These are primarily informational items, so we wanted you to be aware of what's been going on with the housing element since you saw it last, and talk about what the next steps are and what the committee's role is going forward. So if anyone's new to this, our basic format is a staff presentation, committee questions for staff and consultants, public comments, and then a committee discussion if there is any this afternoon. So as I mentioned, we want to talk about what's been happening with the housing element. So we're going to review the Planning Commission feedback from June 29th and the council direction from July 13th. This will be summarizing information that's in the staff memo that the committee received and is available online. Then we're going to talk about the changes between the two versions of the draft housing element. So the most recent version we are calling the initial HCD draft. So it is our first submittal to HCD. We'll be talking about the changes since the public review draft. Then we've got some more information about the HCD review timeline that we'll share with you, and then talk about the next steps and the committee role. So you'll all recall that your last meeting on June 20th, there were a number of key policy issues that you really tuned into and spent your time discussing, and then gave recommendations to the Planning Commission and the Town Council. So those were the opt-in rezoning, the Dorothy Ford Field and open space site, ADUs and JADUs, the buffer, the sunrise strategy that was proposed by the Planning Commission, and then the Glen Oaks equestrian site, the status of that, the business located there, density, those types of related issues. So then we went to the Planning Commission and to the Town Council. And when we did that, if you didn't have a chance to review those materials, we did that kind of in a format that let the council see what this committee had recommended, what the Planning Commission feedback had been, for the council to consider all of that. So they got all of that information, as well as all the links and everything that you've all been privy to this whole time. And so I'm just going to go over this briefly. It's in the staff memo as well, but just to make sure everyone understands what some of that discussion has been to get us to this point. So regarding the opt-in rezoning program, there was Planning Commission consensus. Some things we had some votes on, and there was different discussion. It was handled a little different ways for different topics, but there was consensus to remove the opt-in approach. There was some interest in keeping it if it was revised to be more like what the Planning Commission subcommittee had recommended, with more clear limitations on it. There was concern it had gotten too complicated or hard for people to understand. When we got to the council, however, the council thought that it provided a meaningful opportunity to have different types of housing in the community other than just single family, to accommodate different types of households and different types of families that may want other types of living arrangements. So the consensus from the Town Council was to preserve the opt-in program. However, they did wish to limit it a little bit more. And so the limitation that's in the initial draft is a maximum of 4 dwelling units per acre. That's what came out of your earlier discussion. But then they added a maximum of 4 units per site. So larger properties would not be allowed to have more than 4 units per site. So that's the change that the Town Council made on that one from the review, from your last review of the draft. Then related to ADUs and JADUs, this was another area where the planning commissioners had different opinions. 3 commissioners supported increasing the ADU and JADU numbers quite a bit and trying to use an aggressive marketing plan and incentives to create those units. 2 commissioners did not support that approach and thought there was a lack of historical data, and pointed out that there's a difference between building the units and actually renting the units to lower income people. There was generally support, however, for breaking out ADUs and JADUs into separate categories for the town's tracking, recognizing that they are different in terms of how they exist on a site within an existing building, lower impact from junior ADUs, lower environmental issues, less parking issues, those types of things. So in terms of the Town Council direction, the Town Council consensus was to keep the ADU and the JADU projection that had been recommended by this committee. They did have some interest of seeing a rationale could be developed to increase the above moderate income category, but that was a little bit of a light discussion. The consensus was really to keep the projection that came from this committee's work. Next is related to the buffer. And I know that your committee will relate to this, and people really struggled with the buffer and how to think about it, because it's a really challenging topic for us with our small numbers for the different sites. The planning commissioners were really split on how to address the buffer. Most were interested in lowering it, but there wasn't clear consensus on how to do that. When we got to the town council point, we did hear from the mayor that he wanted to explore kind of a different way to structure it and make sure that we were protecting the town from the no net loss law, which actually could have negative consequences for the town, and not just go with the formula because it was a recommended formula, to just study it a little bit further and see if anything else could be explored that would make sense for us. Then related to the Sunrise program in the Gateway District, this is another area where there were some differences with the Planning Commission. 3 planning commissioners supported creating what they termed a Sunrise program and adding a new Gateway District that would be created for the Dorothy Ford Fields in the open space site and the Ladera Church site across the street. So combining those together and planning them as one area with this gateway feel. The idea being to preserve the gateway feeling along Alpine Road, preserve the oak trees if possible, preserve the baseball field, assuming that would be feasible, and try to make a more holistic approach to planning those sites. There was discussion about when that should happen and when the sunrise, what that meant, and what were the goals of that, what were people trying to achieve. And then late in the night, there was consensus around holding off on the development of the Dorothy Ford Field site for some amount of time, such as 2 years, to assess the town's progress with RENA, to see how things were going. 2 planning commissioners, though, expressed concern that this would add more complexity, and it's already a complex and time-sensitive process. So the council discussed this in quite a bit of detail, and the consensus after that discussion was to go with the Planning Commission's recommendation to create this new gateway district or new gateway land use classification. And that would include the Ford Field site and open space, as well as the Ladera Church site. And to take the time to plan those sites and think about all the feasibility issues that were involved in that. Think about all of the engineering, the feasibility of the affordable housing financing, circulation, creek setbacks, scenic corridor setbacks. Really think about all those things and plan the site holistically. Staff did present to town council our very preliminary findings that we thought that it may be possible to build the affordable housing, preserve at least some portion of the open space, which could potentially include the 2 oak trees being left on site, potentially reconfiguring and improving the baseball diamond and reconfiguring the parking on the site. But we did let council know that we thought that there was significant cost associated with that, in the order of magnitude of something like back of the envelope, $6 million, and that some kind of fundraising or additional funding would likely be required to address that approach. But additional time could be useful in order to assess all of those things and make sure that those decisions going forward were the best possible decisions. And so council did support the idea of waiting a little bit to start that process and going into that process in the 2nd year of the housing element cycle to allow for that planning to happen, and also to allow to see how things were going with the RENA numbers. Then there was also a lot of discussion about the Glen Oak site and what should happen there and talking about the different policy trade-offs. And so there were 3 planning commissioners that agreed that the Glen Oaks site should be added to a sunrise program, meaning it should not be developed at the start and should only be developed as a last resort. They suggested that there be continuing dialogue with Stanford to gauge their interest in keeping an equestrian facility and developing housing for the workers. And then there were 2 planning commissioners that supported keeping the Glen Oak site in the inventory basically as it was, because there was no other replacement for the proposed 29 units. And they thought that all of the sites had been reasonably considered by this committee to get to that point. So there was a lot of community comment on this item, and the council discussed it, and they decided to form a council subcommittee, and that subcommittee should reach out to Stanford and the equestrian center operator, the business owner, to talk about this possibility. Was it feasible to develop housing for the workers? And could that be an affiliated housing program? Could the equestrian center not be developed with a larger housing project? So those were kind of the questions and the issues that the council subcommittee was asked to look into. And so what came of that? So what happened was the mayor and staff, we met with the Stanford representatives, and then we also met with the equestrian center owner. We had separate meetings with each of those parties. And then the mayor and I also had follow-up conversations with the business operator. And what we learned through that series of conversations is that there are significant challenges to the approach of having the equestrian center remain and new housing for the workers get built at that location. So we don't know whether that's a feasible option going forward, but there were enough constraints that we thought that, you know, we should not be banking on that possibility. However, the town does, and we have encouraged Stanford and the business operator to continue that discussion about the future use of the site. So we talked about this with the council subcommittee, and the council subcommittee directed us to keep the site in the inventory, but to reduce the number of units that are allocated to the site from 29 down to 16. So a really significant reduction in the number of units here. And that number was reached by thinking about the number of units that were still needed in combination with the conversation around the buffer. What was an acceptable buffer? The council subcommittee felt comfortable reducing the buffer in the above moderate income category. And so bringing those 2 concepts together, the number of units came down to 16. And then that leaves a buffer in that category that goes all the way down to 8% buffer in the above moderate income category. But then the overall buffer for all of the sites in the whole plan remains at 16. And you'll remember that the guidance from HCD was 15 to 30. So the council subcommittee was thinking about these items, kind of bringing together 2 different concepts to try to balance those priorities. And the way that it's allocated in the latest version of the draft is that 14 of those 16 units are in the above moderate income category. And I wanted to remind people that those could always be developed at a lower income level. So there are a couple of places in our draft housing element where units are in the above moderate income category, but we know they might actually come in lower places, and that's okay. We're doing our best to plan for these things, and there's some variables that are going to come into play. So even though we learned that there are challenges to maintaining the equestrian center and adding housing, the town's policies will not create obstacles to doing so if the owner and the operator find a way to be able to do that. In fact, by specifically allowing housing on the site, it could streamline an application in the future if there ever were one. And so this is a question between the owner of the property and the owner of the business, but the town's policies should not be an obstacle to their communication about the long-term use of the site going forward. So now I'm going to go through some of the specific changes that we made. So this is a table in your staff memo. There's also a version of this that's on the website. So if members of the public are trying to compare the last version, which we call the public review draft, to this latest version, the initial HCD draft, you can refer to this table that's posted with the housing element so that you can compare and see what the changes have been. Of course, we made minor changes like typos and things like that throughout the document. But these are the changes that are related to policies or meaningful wording changes or things like that. So within the introduction section, we added more detail to the community engagement summary. So this is because other cities and towns are hearing back from HCD that they really want a lot of detail here. So we added more detail in the introduction and a lot more detail in the appendix related to community engagement. Then in the housing needs assessment area, we just added some new data that became available while we've been working on this related to the unsheltered homeless survey. And we added some additional facts and background information so that there would be stronger connection between different sections of the document. And again, this is because we're getting that feedback from HCD who's reviewed other cities. Section 3 is the AFFH summary, affirmatively furthering fair housing. We added a background section that is highlighting Portola Valley's past and current efforts around fair housing and affordable housing, again, in response to feedback from HCD. And then because the council told us to create that new gateway district, we updated program 1-1 to include that, so that it would run consistently throughout the document. Next is section 4 in the constraints analysis. We wanted to highlight for our HCD reviewer the process that this committee went through to look at all of the safety constraints that we have in town. And so we added those maps, the constraints maps that you all looked at for many months in the middle of this process. We went ahead and added those maps into the document so our HCD reviewer would know the kind of rigorous approach that the committee took. And there were no changes to section 5 for resources. And then section 6 is on the sites inventory. And so this is just the bullet points to say what we did related to the Glen Oaks, right? So we reduced the above moderate income units for the Glen Oaks site. So from 29 to 16. That reduced the overall buffer from 21% to 16%. Then we did a little bit of work around the realistic capacity discussion. So for each of the sites, we had to describe that it was feasible and realistic for those to be developed. So based on feedback from 21 Elements, we added just some more language, we added an extra map, we put in some more details into this section so that HCD would be able to see your work. We're kind of showing our work, right? Like in math class, as the stuff that we added here. Then we had one of the new multifamily zoning districts. This is the one that was going to apply to Glen Oaks. And so we changed that. We reduced it from 8 units per acre to 4 units per acre. So 8 dwelling units per acre, DU/AC. So that kind of goes with that policy change. Then I already mentioned the opt-in single family rezoning. So that stays very close to what this committee just described and discussed, but it has a maximum of 4 dwelling units per acre or a max of 4 per site. So whichever is more restrictive would apply to this program, because that's how zoning normally works. Then to better meet our legal requirements, this is just, we moved one of the sites from one category to another. It's not a policy issue. It's more like, how does HCD define things? So we moved the Dorothy Ford Field and open space site from one category to another from a legal point of view. And then we added some more feasibility analysis, again, based on feedback that we got from 21 Elements. Next is the goals, policies, and programs. So first we updated some of the quantified objectives and the metrics for the first two programs. So we did some wording changes and we updated some of the numbers so that things would be consistent throughout. We created the new gateway land use classification that I mentioned. And so that's what a lot of this is included here. So you can kind of see what detail we included in that new land use classification. Pretty consistent with what this committee had already discussed as we were going through the process. So that gateway will be Ladera Church and Ford Field open space. Ladera Church would still have its upzoning. And so depending on the timing of the Ladera Church, whatever project they go through, they could either collaborate with the town or they could do a project on their own, and they could do a project on their own through the zoning or through the affiliated housing program. So they have a couple of different routes that they could potentially go forward. But this approach gives us the option, if Ladera Church wants to collaborate, to have a cohesive planning process for those sites. And then the site planning process itself. So this is updated policy 3-1. So the timing that we have in the initial draft housing element is to begin the site planning process in January of 2024. So looking at technical feasibility of the site, those types of steps, and then issue an RFP, which is request for proposals. That's the outreach we would do to affordable housing developers. And that has a timeline of by September 2024. And so this does allow an opportunity to cohesively design the site, think about what needs to happen there, the exact number of units that are needed, so we could take into account how other programs of the housing element are going and make that part of the decision-making process. Then we updated program 6-4. It had language that was not very clear or not very certain. I think that came from this committee's discussion. So we wanted to strengthen that language and say that we're going to reevaluate sites to determine if any new ones are needed or if we need any new fire prevention measures. So once the new fire hazard maps are available, this is the check-in point that we've talked about doing, and we're formalizing it here. Then next is similar to that. Once the new fire hazard maps are available, we would go back and reevaluate our ADU and SB9 ordinances to see if any new fire protection measures are needed, any other policies. So that kind of takes care of that, updates related to fire safety. And then program 7-1 is related to ADUs and JADUs. So as I mentioned, this committee, Planning Commission and Council also value and really emphasizing JADUs. So we'll be creating new informational materials specifically related to JADUs and have a streamlined path for people to create those within their existing homes. And then we'll be tracking ADUs and JADUs separately so that we can see how each of those programs are working. So for the purposes of our submittal to HCD, since they think of them as one category of housing unit, our numbers are all combined, but we, the town, will start tracking them separately so that we can report to council how things are going as we are in the 8-year implementation. Next is Appendix A, community engagement. So I mentioned we added a lot more information here based on feedback that we received and to really demonstrate to HCD the kind of process that the town has held to get to this point. Certainly, it's the most intensive outreach process of any community that I am aware of in the county and in the larger area. So we wanted to bring that to their attention. So we added meetings, dates, we added information about what was talked about at different times, some of the things that we mailed out and distributed throughout the community. We highlighted the town's efforts to reach out to local employers and employees to reach some of the segments of our workforce that we don't normally reach, added demographics, added summaries, and attached results from the survey that you all led Mary way back early in the year. Then we updated some data in Appendix B. We updated for consistency in Appendix C. We did not make any changes to Appendix D. And then Appendix E is just a bureaucratic kind of form that's required by HCD. So we added that and made that part of the housing element. So next, talking about what happens now. This group has put so much effort to get us to this place of having a complete draft housing element that's ready for HCD review. So I would like to pause and say thank you. This has been an incredible effort. And in my about 20 years of doing professional planning, I have never seen a citizen committee commit to a process like this that required so much time, so much work, and so many challenging issues for you to deal with. So I think this is really incredible, the way that this community operates, the level of participation that we've had from residents, and this committee's work. So we're at this point, and so now everyone is looking at me and say, what happens next? And the good news is that there's a couple cities ahead of us. And so we're getting information about what we think is going to happen next. And now we can start to plan for that. Okay, so number one, this committee's not done. Sorry. Sorry about that. Your heavy lift, we think and we hope is done because you've done such a great job. But there's still more work to do when we get comments back from HCD. So what we've learned is that first we expect to get a phone call from them. And we think the phone call is going to be really meaningful. So other cities have reported that with the phone call, they got a lot of feedback, that the HCD staff had reviewed the entire document and had specific feedback on different sections, had overall feedback, that it was incredibly useful. And that phone call is happening about 60 days in, but in some cases, it's actually happening a little bit quicker. So if we go 60 days in from our submittal date, then we can expect to have that phone call with HCD by about October 10th. Okay, so that will give us a lot of feedback on what do we need to do to make revisions to our initial draft. So then what we'll do is we will reconvene this committee so we can talk about the feedback that we're receiving from HCD and start working on it. And so we do expect to hold a committee meeting for this committee on October 17th so that we can talk about the information that we get back from HCD. And then again, I'm sorry, but we might need to have a second meeting right there, kind of like 2 meetings back to back, so that this committee has a chance to really process the feedback from HCD and make any recommendations on what we need to do. Or it might be more staff driven, like they may ask for more analysis that we can prepare and then present to you. So it'll kind of depend on the nature of the feedback that we receive back. But we do ask you to expect to meet with this committee for that October 17th meeting, and maybe again right after that. Then we're going to get written comments from HCD, and those are anticipated November 9th. We don't think it'll be sooner. What we've heard from our colleagues is the written comments may not be really detailed. The phone call may be the most helpful part. So what staff will be doing is being in touch with HCD and trying to judge, do we have all the comments? Is there anything else coming? But we think that phone call is going to help us a lot. So then we'll work with this committee to address their comments. We're going to take your comments back in again. Staff and consultant team will make changes to the draft. We put it back out to the public, and then we present it to the Planning Commission and the Town Council. So that kind of takes you through the next couple of steps and what we can expect to happen. A couple other things that are related to your work that I wanted you to be aware of, that we're also working on. We have a new idea that came out of all of your discussion to create what we're right now. This is a new idea. We're talking about creating an ADU and JADU ambassadors. And the idea would be that we build on this community engagement that we've had and create a small group of residents, 1, 2, or 3, maybe, we're still thinking about it. And those residents would be designated to assist with outreach and education related to ADUs and JADUs, and also assist with the execution of a survey so that we could get broad participation. So this is kind of connecting the dots from some of your conversations about, do we have the information that we need? What level of interest is there really in our community? Because, you know, the draft housing element that you all have developed through this process includes a high number of ADUs and JADUs, but there have been questions that have come out of that discussion, like, do we have all of the information? So this is our idea, to start to collect some of that information that the community has been asking for. And so this is going to be discussed at the next council meeting. And so if you're interested in this, please tune into the next council meeting. What I'm giving you here is a very broad outline of our ideas so far. So much more information to come on this. Then also wanted to let you know that we have gone into contract. The council has approved a contract with the zoning code consultants that are going to work with us on the zoning code amendments that are necessary to implement the draft housing element. So we've been thinking about the best way to move forward with that and exactly what needs to be done when. So our technical team is thinking about that and working on that. In early versions of our work plan, this committee was going to have an active role in those zoning code amendments. But the way that the housing element has ultimately developed, we don't think that's necessarily warranted or a good use of this committee's time now because of where we've ended up. And so the Planning Commission will have the primary role of reviewing the zoning code changes. That's typically within their purview, and they have a lot of experience doing that. And they will make recommendations up to council for council's review. Then also just wanted to make sure you're aware, this is not in your purview, but we are underway with the environmental analysis under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And that will be, the draft document will be available in the fall. There'll be a public review period, and there'll be an opportunity for the Planning Commission to review that. And then it goes up to council for their review and ultimate approval. And then this is the updated timeline. This is included in your packet, and we'll get this version posted on the website. It just adjusts some of the arrows to where we have actually ended up on a couple of different things, and we've had to adjust on our way through. We're working on the safety element update at the same time, and we are getting ready for a public review of the full draft safety element. But as we've said in the past, our team has continued to take anything as we're working on the safety element that could be an issue for the housing element. We've been thinking about that. And then the rezoning work we're showing here, going from summer into the winter, environmental review is underway. And then you can see in the housing element update kind of where those arrows are falling now as we've been working on it. So this is an updated version that we'll be getting out for everyone. So that concludes my presentation in terms of updates, where we are and what's coming next. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And again, thank you. This is an amazing place to be for the town to have our draft housing element in for review. So thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate your summary as always. Okay, just so people know, we have now 28 attendees from town that are participating. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Okay, Jeff, go ahead. You got a question or a comment?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks to Laura, all of our staff, and all of you for the work you've put in this past year. I agree that we are actually in a very good position, whether we've done a lot of work on this, and I am proud of the work we've done. I also know that HCD, from what we're hearing initially, is being very looking at these things with a fine tooth comb. Other jurisdictions are already getting things back that we know are. I mean, they're going to be pushing us on this. So we will have more work ahead of us. But I think we're up for it. One quick clarification is that there's been some comments about the baseball field, and because this became a source of confusion the last time it was talked about, there's no talk of building on the baseball field. This is about the baseball field might be moved slightly to accommodate a plan that could save the oak trees. So just the last time I got a lot of calls from the baseball community that were concerned about this. The Ford Field baseball field is not going anywhere unless it's just being moved slightly to accommodate the housing on the site. I just want to clarify that. And the other thing is that we're not actually going to create residents. We're going to recruit residents, and we're going to create a committee of residents to be ADU ambassadors. I feel strongly about cloning. So that's all.
Okay, good to clarify that. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Anne.
Great. No, thank you, Laura and staff, for getting this submitted. I'm definitely hopeful that it will get pretty far with HCD. I read in the paper, of course, about other towns, and I feel like, wow, they've really left the hard work for October, November, December. So I hope we've done a big chunk of it already. I am thrilled, Laura, that there I know it's a might, be a plan that could save the oak trees. As a lot of people have heard me say, I support this plan, but I've always lost sleep over those oak trees. So if there was a way to save it, I'd be just hugely in favor of it. Are there any sketches or drawings that show kind of a rough layout with the saving of the oak trees? I'd just be curious to see that.
There are not any sketches that are developed enough for that purpose. What we did was we had a working meeting with the planner who does the mapping, and it was very geometric. So we kind of took the geometry of the affordable housing project, the way that we've looked at it so far, the geometry of the baseball diamond and how it could be angled or tilted, and then used our professional experience to think about how parking could be undergrounded and potentially configured in a different way. And in that working meeting, it's very rough, but I think it could be possible. But like I said, it is very expensive. And so I wanted to make sure people are aware that there should not be an expectation that all of those things can happen, but there's certainly good reason to explore it and see what would be feasible there.
Great. That brings me to my second question. We have this $4 million fund for some low-cost housing. Is there any way we can apply that to this, let me call it $6 million to save the tree idea?
Yes.
That would be a great use for it from
right.
me as a
And
resident.
yes.
I'm all in favor.
So it will be a council level decision to talk about how to spend we have about $4.2 million in the Affordable Housing Fund. There are a couple of programs in the housing element that do say that we would be using some of that affordable housing money based on the draft that we have right now. And so this project at Ford Field says it would be potentially funded with that fund. And then there is the ADU incentive programs that we created that also include some funding. Okay. So exactly how it's done will depend on future council decision and direction. But the assumption is that that money could be used for Ford Field. And then our staff estimate is that additional funds in the millions would be required to achieve all of those objectives.
Okay, thanks. And then our buffer is down now to 16%, but the guidance is 15 to 30%. Have you seen any feedback from HCD to other cities that had a buffer down close to 15%? What was the feedback, or what's likely to be? Are we likely to get a lot of pushback on this 16%?
We have not seen a lot of feedback yet in our region or from any similar cities that we could really draw from. But in discussing it with the council subcommittee, there was comfort in decreasing the above moderate income category, because we know that there's less scrutiny from HCD on that above moderate income.
I see.
And in a typical year, there's a couple of new houses that might get built that kind of aren't picked up along the way, and there could be a lot split here or there that results in above moderate. And so I think taking all those things together, there's comfort in reducing that one. That reduces the overall buffer down, but it's still within the recommended guidance.
And my last question is actually maybe for the whole committee. I'm a little nervous about the work at the end of the year, right, with holidays and stuff. And I note that our normally scheduled housing meeting would be November 21st, which is the week of Thanksgiving. And I'm just wondering if we should pick a date in the week of November 14th to get on people's calendars in case we need to have another meeting. I'm assuming that the week with Thanksgiving in it might be hard to have a good number of people and for the public to come.
Yeah, I think this is a great point, Anne. We here is me and the consultant team are working on the schedule towards the end of the year. And we think most likely this committee's work will be primarily in October.
Okay,
And
good.
then the planning commission's work will be primarily in November.
I see.
So we think that this committee will be done by then.
Okay.
So we're going to work on this a little bit more in the meantime, and then we'll have to get in touch with you if we need an additional meeting to schedule that with the Thanksgiving holiday, because I think you're absolutely right.
Sounds good. That's all my questions. Thanks.
And that's because, Laura, you're expecting the bulk of the feedback from HCD to be coming by October 10th, right?
Yes,
So then our committee would respond to that with you, and then we move on.
yes.
Okay. Great. Okay, good questions, Anne. Thanks. Bob, go ahead.
Thank you. I only have one question, but it's kind of a long one because in order to ask the question, I have to go through some history.
You have a presentation to share?
Well, I gave up on that, Jocelyn, so I am going to wave some figures in front of the camera. And
Okay,
hopefully
all
that
right, go
works.
for it.
The draft that was sent to HCD includes the CAL FIRE map. And I don't know whether you can
I
see
knew
this.
there was some slides of some kind.
It looks like it's out of focus.
It's a little bit, maybe if you hold it back. Yeah.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. It includes that map, and as we discussed, that was done by a statewide analysis by CAL FIRE, done remotely using aerial imaging and topographic data, coarse resolution with 20 to 200 acre blocks. In contrast, gosh, this is just not going to work. Ray Moritz was hired by the town, did a boots on the ground analysis. Highly detailed, high resolution. George Mader sent a memo to the town council in 2008 that documented that Moritz and the fire district agreed that it was Moritz's map that was the most accurate by far. And he actually wrote, quote, "It behooves the town to submit the most accurate information," which at the moment is, of course, the work of Ray Moritz. The most recent revision, the safety element that we have, was in 2010, and that incorporated the Moritz map and report as reference for the degree of fire hazard in the town. And in fact, there's a policy prohibiting construction of structures for human occupation in the highest hazard areas, that's the red here, unless sufficient mitigation measures have been taken to reduce the fire risk to an acceptable level. That's what our current safety element draws on. Within the past year, both Ray Moritz and then Fire Marshal Denise Ania confirmed the superiority of the Moritz analysis to the CAL FIRE. In January of this year, the president of the Fire District Board of Directors wrote, this is a quote, "There is no interest in improving the limited CAL FIRE map from 2008 as it is too old and also too limited based on our assessment. You may recall that the district rejected this map as too limited even back in 2008. It is not a safe and accurate map to approve in 2022 either. And then finally, earlier this year in Housing Element Committee meetings, we heard from both Fire Marshal Bullard and the town's fire consultant, Zeke Ludner, who both indicated that the Moritz map is the most accurate, and if anything, underestimates our fire hazard, not overestimates it. And in fact, Zeke Ludner indicated that if he were to do it today, his map would likely have more red on it. And so, long path to my question, which is this: why is it that when our current safety element puts forward the Moritz analysis as the most appropriate reference, and when all our fire safety authorities cite the Moritz map as significantly superior to the 2008 CAL FIRE map, why are we using the CAL FIRE assessment as reference? That's my question.
Well, as this committee is aware, back in January, right, when we had the guest speakers related to this, we talked about using information from our fire consultant, Zeke Lunder, related to topography and vegetation, and thinking about that, right, and having a placekeeper to approximate fire safety until future mapping is done. And so the housing element considers the slope maps that were recommended for us to consider by Zeke. It includes the evacuation maps that the town has prepared in compliance with the recent state law for evacuation, so one way in or out. And then each of the individual sites has been evaluated and looked at by Zeke Lunder to see if there is any concerns. We've been doing that throughout the process. And we're waiting for the new maps to come out. And then we have a program that has us revisit our ADU ordinance and our SB 9 ordinance when the new maps are out. So we believe, staff believes, that we have included appropriate, best practice, good information that's available to us today, and put programs in place to evaluate the maps when evaluate our policies when the new maps are available. So we think that the process has been appropriate and guided by professionals.
This is not the time to get into an arm wrestling match, so I won't, but I'll just ask one more clarifying question. And that is, if we were to use the Moritz map, which is in our current safety element, would that impact the housing that we're envisioning now? And you may not be able to answer that off the top of your head, I understand.
Well, I don't think I can answer that specifically, except that our housing sites, because of the discussion of this committee, are targeted towards places where we don't have the concerns about the topography, the fire spread, and we have good evacuation access. So I wouldn't anticipate it changing, but we've been using the same analytic framework now for many months. And we do think the analytic framework is supported by the fire professionals.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Anne, your hand is still up. If you're
That's
done.
old. Yeah.
Good, thanks. Sarah, go ahead.
Whoops. So yeah, real quick before my question, Laura, just want to say massive kudos to you. Thank you so much for getting the housing element in. As we were talking about a bit ago, it's like getting your finals, your thesis, and all your college midterms in, and the good feeling that is once it's submitted. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your good work. Also, huge thanks to the community. As has been said countless times, 50 hours of public meetings, and so many community members who have sat through these meetings and given their input, which has had a massive impact on the output here. So thanks to all of you. And then of course, this housing element committee. Thank you so much. When I kind of reflect back on what was submitted, on my count, I think the inventory recommended from this group, 94% of that is included in the final draft here. The preservation of opt-in, which was the preference of the majority from this group, as well as the preservation of the ADUs and JADUs. As I said on the council meeting when we discussed all of that, this group is really the one that created the layers on the cake, which was Laura's analogy way back when. And then, you know, in the final weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before the council meeting, we had what I consider kind of the icing on the cake with some of the adjustments and supplemental suggestions from the Planning Commission. So I think it's been a really collaborative effort, and I really thank everybody who's been involved. So that's my preamble. Touching on fire, one question I was going to ask, and Bob, I know you've been in these meetings where we've discussed many times about how once we do get the map from Woodside Fire, that all of this will be revisited. So, you know, that's kind of the overarching thing that we've all acknowledged. I know they were originally hoping way back when to have it in July. My understanding is they just recently picked a partner to do that project. And Laura, I was wondering if you happen to know the status of that or what the timeline is from Woodside Fire, so we know when we will potentially be getting that map.
I haven't heard the latest update. I have a regularly scheduled meeting with the fire district tomorrow. I had to miss the last one. Some of you know I was out with COVID while we were trying to finish this whole thing. So I missed my last meeting with the fire district. So we'll get an update on the timing with them tomorrow. When I talked to them last, they were going to try to do it in phases, and it's subject to the availability of the consultant to be able to do the early phases that are most useful and important for our process and other policy related things that they're working on. So it's something that's going to take, I would think, still several months for them to be able to produce those documents. And I don't know if those fire professionals are impacted by the time of year. Most of the fire professionals that we work with are busier than in this time of year, which is kind of the more traditional fire season. So I'm sorry, I don't have a more detailed answer.
Okay, thanks on that. My other question was about the ADU incentive program. I know, you know, there is strong interest to see if we can get increased ADU production, meaning the building of ADUs. What I think often gets left out is the renting side of it, and the fact that, you know, not only would they need to be rented, but they are built, but they need to be rented to low and very low income, which is in the range of $1,700 to $2,100 a month, versus what we typically see is around, you know, $3,500 to $5,000. And so do we have time or opportunity still in the process? Like, what is, I guess, if you could remind me the details of the ADU incentive program, and if we have the ability to create kind of more of a subsidy, because I think that's different from what we have right now in the housing element.
Yeah, let me get to it. Got old-fashioned paper in front of me. Okay, so I'm on the initial HCD draft, if you're following along. And it's related to policy 7 is where we're talking about ADUs and JADUs. So program 7.1 is about the public information. So this is new informational materials for ADUs and JADUs, and then tracking those separately. So that's the first program. So that's something that staff will be doing and is a general fund thing. And we're working on when the timing is of that. So like, what's the earliest that we could do that? So that doesn't require any additional funding beyond our normal budget process to fund planning stuff. Then 7.2 is the amnesty program for existing unpermitted ADUs. Establishing an amnesty program really does take some work. There are legal considerations that we have to look into and building code considerations. I have worked in a community where we had an amnesty program, and if it's not really carefully crafted, it's really difficult to achieve, because the property owners have one set of expectations and the city or town has another set. We have to make sure the ADUs are safe, kind of above everything else. So the timeline for that is creating that program by December of 2023. And that does not have any incentives or funding associated with it in the draft, just normal kind of general fund, no incentives. Then we've got 7.3 is direct assistance from our building division. So from my staff, for people that want to build a JADU or just like make the minor modifications for that. And so that's like if you need to add a bathroom or add a kitchen or put up a wall, something of that nature, we'd be giving them direct assistance so that they could move through that process more quickly. And we've got that one tagged at June of 2023 to get that up and running. So pretty quickly after adoption. And that one does not have any incentive associated with it other than the processing assistance. So that is something that, you know, if the council was interested, we could potentially add more incentive to that somehow to create more incentive for JADUs. So that's something that I guess could be possible in the future. We've got creating office hours with our different professionals, our town geologist and town engineer, people like that. Same timeline, June 2023. That would be paid for by the general fund. There's no incentive associated with that. Then program 7.5 is to develop and run a survey of ADU owners to see how the ADUs are being used. So if they're being rented and how much they're being rented for. So this is in anticipation of like those policies moving forward and what this committee requested in terms of what you'd like to see in the future for accountability to make sure the ADUs are being rented. And so that happens in certain years throughout the 8-year planning period. And then we'd be using that information and thinking about how our ADU programs are working. So that's kind of the data that we continue to collect as we go forward. 7.6 is the matching program that matches low-income tenants that have been displaced with people in town that want to rent their ADUs for lower incomes. So this is one of the ones that specifically talks about an incentive. So the way that we have it drafted right now is based on the feedback that we got from Hcd, which is have a starting point of your ADU program. Then if you're reaching your numbers, you're good to continue. But if you need to kind of turn up the volume a little bit, then you have an incentive you can go to further encourage more ADUs from coming. So they recommended we have that kind of 2 tiers. So the way that this is written is that every 2 years we'd be evaluating this policy and see if it's working. And if it's not working, then we would provide incentives. So this could be things like waiving the fees for any work that they had to do or offering another financial incentive. So sometimes this is where people might do something like a rent subsidy or something of that nature, to be able to have more of those residents be able to afford the ADUs. And then the last, that one is, we would have HIP Housing as our partner. They're a nonprofit that does these matches. And then the last one is to develop pre-approved floor plans for ADUs and JADUs. And then same thing, evaluate that every 2 years and see how that's going. And so that one does not have any incentive associated with it, but there might be some creative solutions where the town, for example, could pay to create those ADU floor plans or to have the plan checkers review them for consistency with the code. And that could be an incentive. So that way, when people come in, they don't have to pay the cost of that. So there's like some little tweaks that could be possible to further encourage ADUs, but they're really small. I would say tweaks beyond what this committee has already discussed.
Well, I think also, I guess to my the point I was trying to make, and maybe I didn't ask it right, is that where we are, the vast majority of our incentives are around production, so supply of ADUs. And I don't think that addresses the issue of actually renting successfully to low income, renters. And so my more I guess targeted question is then, do we have time in the process to evolve anything around rental subsidies? So we're addressing the actual renting of them to truly low income people versus just focusing on the supply side to get them built.
Yes. I mean, there's certainly time when we review all of this in October and November to think about that. We've gone pretty far into the best practices that we thought, could be applied in the community. So I think the work would be around seeing if there are any other best practices around the rent subsidies, because the way I understood this committee's discussion is that there wasn't a lot of support for a subsidy to physically build units, right? Given the cost of building units, it's very small. The subsidy we could give would be very small compared to the cost of building a unit. But the ability to have someone rent out to a lower income person and have there be some subsidy built into that is only included in the one program that we have, and could potentially be developed further and included.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you just say that last part again? I'm sorry. The subsidy.
It
About the
could be
subsidy?
possible
Yeah.
to have additional subsidy around the rental of ADUs to lower income people. We would
Mhm.
have to think more about what form that would take.
Mhm.
Because anytime you're using, and you can imagine this, it kind of gets bureaucratic too. Anytime you're using government funds for something, that there's all kinds of rules that come along with that.
Yeah.
And so we have to think about, think like the technical aspects. But in the kind of the short answer is that it could be possible to create more rental subsidy incentives.
Thanks for repeating that. Okay. Any other questions, comments from our group? No, I did have one. And I guess mine is around the fundraising of, whatever the target number is, you're estimating 6 million for the gateway approach. So I'm familiar with how we set it up for fundraising for the town center, because I was very involved in that. And it was a citizen group that was created kind of a separate entity from the town. It was a nonprofit, and we did the fundraising on behalf of the town. Is that the kind of model that you would envision for this?
We have not thought about it to that degree.
Okay.
And I would categorize it as fundraising or other funding sources.
Okay.
So we've identified what we think are some primary funding sources for affordable housing. But more work would need to be done for any kind of secondary or tertiary, funding sources for affordable housing. But I wanted to address that there would probably still be a gap, even if we were able to obtain all of the reasonable affordable housing, and that we have heard members of the public say, we will fundraise for this.
Mhm.
And so I, was trying to bring that out to the council to
Mhm.
let them know that it could be possible.
Mhm.
There was a chance, but it probably would include some kind of fundraising effort.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And then, so the funding sources would be coming from where? What kinds of, this, if you can kind of generally share what that would be, it would be helpful.
For our normal affordable housing funding sources,
Mhm. Yeah.
the normal funding sources are the state tax credits that we've talked about in this group. And we kind of were trying to check the feasibility when we met with Alta Housing about this.
Mhm.
And then the county themselves funds some projects. And so we would be checking with them. We would be checking with the different affordable housing developers if they're aware of any other funding sources. The more complex affordable housing projects will often have, 4 or 6 funding sources that would be common that they draw from. And
Okay.
then the town could be required to make a contribution in addition to the land
Mhm.
from our affordable housing fund.
Mhm. So, okay. We're too far away from it now for me to really ask this question, but I guess a concern I have is just the timing on all that, and timing and getting a campaign set up and implemented, takes a while. So
Yeah, it's
I'm
very
sure that'll all get
challenging. Yes,
factored in when we get to that point.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so I think we're gonna turn it over to with 30 members from our town who are participating, and this is a time for you to make comments or ask questions about what the content of what we just covered. So Dave Cardinal, you've got your hand up. Why don't you go first?
Great. I want to make a comment about fire maps, which we hear about every 5 minutes. They all get worse, except for when we do veg management. But I want people to think through what's likely to happen when we get new fire maps, because it's not rocket science. The fire maps are going to say the highest fire danger is in the steepest areas, the farthest away from the main roads, that have the most vegetation and the smallest routes of access. So in terms of what that means for our housing element, honestly, I don't see any way that that is going to affect anything more than it will affect the ADUs. So we have this kind of hope that ADUs will be a massive solution, but most of our ADUs are in areas that, or many of them are in areas that are going to be high fire danger. Most of our higher density units are in areas that are arguably as safe as it gets. They're down on major arteries and flat areas with good access to things and more openness. So I'm all for better fire maps, but we need to realize that it's not going to mean we're not going to have to do high density development. It may mean we have to do more of it because our ADUs aren't going to be safe. So thank you.
Thanks for the comment, Dave. Dale Fow, you're next.
Great. Thank you very much for taking my comment question here. And I want to thank Bob Turcott for pointing out the significant difference between the CAL FIRE map and the Moritz map. I'd also like to point out that when the EPC reviewed the safety, what little bit of the safety element we saw earlier this year, we specifically recommended that the Moritz map be used in the safety element and not the CAL FIRE map, which of course is not even relevant any longer. And I also want to point out to Dave Cardinal's comment that he is not correct. There's a riparian corridor that goes right down the center of the flats in Portola Valley, which is a great conduit for fire, and was even commented on by Zeke Lunder, that is a great place for fire to move sort of from Stanford Weekend Acres right into the center of Portola Valley. So the fire maps will not necessarily clear all of that area. And I think it's very important that we take all of that into account. We could have adopted anytime since 2008, the Moritz maps, and we shouldn't be arguing about this now. It should have been done a long time ago, and they should certainly be used in the safety element. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think Laura is going to address comments at the end of all this. I'm sorry about your pronunciation of your name, Majda Jones. You're up next.
You. Yeah, it's Maida Jones.
Maida, sorry.
That's all right. Everybody gets it wrong. I finally figured out how to put my name instead of a number down.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's
yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I'm just concerned about the timing of when the new fire maps come out, which I'm just assuming are going to be much more accurate than what we're working with now, especially since we're not working with the Moritz maps. The timing between those maps coming out and then having to relook at the entire plan, that's going to take some time and could be quite complicated and might involve more community feedback again. And I haven't ever heard that addressed in any of our discussions. We've kind of, to my mind, we have put those new fire maps to the side and said, yeah, they're coming. And granted, there's been a huge postponement. They were originally due in July, which would have made your job easier. But now that they're coming out in the fall, which is what I've heard, hopefully, I'm just wondering how we're going to handle this as a community, because it will be a bolus of brand new, very relevant information. There's a lot of concern about fire danger. The other thing I want to mention is I live on the ranch, and the ranch is going forward with the idea that the town has the entire fire problem under control. Many people here feel we at the ranch don't have to worry about fire issues, even though our buildings are far closer to each other than the buildings in general around Portola Valley. And that concerns me because I think a lot of residents here at the ranch are operating, they don't tend to come to these meetings, as far as I can tell, and they're operating under false assumptions about fire safety regulations and concerns. Thanks.
Thank you, Maida. Okay, we've got Leslie up next. If you could provide your last name, please, that would be helpful.
Oh, hi, it's Leslie Crease.
Hi, Leslie.
Sorry, I was editing around on my Zoom the other day. Hey, Maida, first, I live in the ranch. I think we're the only two who show up to these meetings from the ranch, but there you go. I had a question. I got confused at one point in the discussion. Does the state doesn't require us to monitor rents and whether units are rented, does it? Or provide subsidies to rent or make sure the housing is then occupied? Is that part of the requirement? Or is that something that was discussed as something you think is a good practice? I guess that's a question for what was said.
Okay. We'll have Laura cover that at the end.
Great. Thank you. That was it.
Thanks, Leslie. Next up, Peter Littman. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for a very good summary of what is in the plan that was submitted last week. I really found Laura's description of how the discussion at Glen Oaks went much more informative than the written comment. But my question is, to the degree that this is a possible site for very low income housing, if the workers at the horse facility could stay there, how can this be consistent with reducing the density to only 4 units per acre, and with 4 acres of buildable land for 16 units, what's left for the possibility of a stable? It seems like there's just no possibility for both above median income housing and the stable and the workers at that site anymore with the plan that has gone in. And that brings us back to the question to how do we possibly try to save Dorothy Ford Park if we can't find some very low income elsewhere? And the second question is, to the degree that Dorothy Ford Open Space Preserve, how does that qualify as non-vacant land when it's been an open space preserve for 50 years? So anyway, I would be very interested to hear comments about that. And I hope the town as a whole can try to work to come up with some better solutions during the late stages of this plan and save the Oaks with spending less than $6 million to do it for 2 trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judy Murphy, go on.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that if we're hoping to increase ADU production over the numbers we put in the RENA, we all understand why we can't go up on those numbers in the RENA. But the hope that if we push ADUs, we can get more things that qualify as low-income housing. And in doing so, we can protect Dorothy Ford Park. It makes no sense to me that we are delaying outreach, eased permitting criteria and incentives, that if those things are delayed, then that just delays the production of ADUs. And I think we should prioritize them to the front of this calendar so the sunrise won't be triggered. If we delay them, then we inevitably hit this sunrise. And delaying makes the use of Dorothy Ford Park almost inevitable because we won't have enough other low-income units that we've produced before 2 years from now. It's like impossible if we aren't pushing the ADUs now. So I think that needs to be a super high priority. And number two, another RENA cycle is much closer than we would like, horrors. The Inclusionary Housing Fund, I would urge that we don't spend it. We don't think in terms of spending it, that we need it, we will need it in the future, and that we should think in terms of loans, no interest, low interest loans, ways that this money will stay in a fund so that we continue to have a fund and can use it for the various incentives that make more sense down the line than they might make sense now. We can see where the real needs are, and that we then continue to have this housing fund instead of just blowing it all in this RENA cycle where we first take the whole thing seriously. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Judy. I think we're done with questions. Leslie, your hand is up still. But you've already spoken, right? So is that from before? Christy Corley, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering why the Dorothy Ford open space is not a conservation easement such as the Hawthorns. Why didn't the town create a conservation easement for known open space land? And I've also think that our open space committee should be looking at all titles and deeds to see how they're written and make sure that we protect our recreation lands and our open space lands so we can still recreate and we can still use our open space. That's my one question. And how do you plan to raise the 6 million? Would it be a parcel tax or a bond? And what exactly would it be for? The residents did pass a parcel tax in the past, and we have added funds to the open space fund. And we need to trust that these funds go accordingly when we do donate our money, such as parcel taxes. So my question is, where did that money go for the open space parcel funds in the past, in the different years? Number three is it true with bonus density law that if you have 20 units per acre, meaning 50 units, that you would also get 80% increase, which would take the units up to 90 units? Is that possible and is that correct? I think the public needs to realize what the maximum possibility is on that site. I also am asking if you plan to do a comprehensive study rather than a partial study for traffic. I don't feel it was a comprehensive study as it could be with all our streets, including Westridge, and all the arterials. Very few was studied, and I believe we need to take it to step 2 on our traffic reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, Betsy Morgan Thaler.
Yes, happy to do committee. Thank you for taking this question. Happy summer. My question really regards the ADU campaign, since so much is riding on it, and we all want it to be successful. The issue really relates to ADU production, and particularly for the purposes of renting to our low-income families, low and lower income families, combined with the homeowners' reasonable concern that adding on to the property, they will incur not just the cost of creating that ADU, but also could well incur a property tax reassessment. I wanted to know if there is any effort statewide, or particularly here in the Bay Area with our high housing costs and land costs, to remedy that in way, any tax relief or anything that we can offer homeowners that really want to contribute to the well-being of this community, but we all have cost barriers. So that's it. And
Great.
thank you to all of the other questioners. I'm learning a lot.
Thanks for participating, Betsy. Just to update, we've got 33 people from town participating at the moment. Okay, next hand up, phone number ending 7562. Can you identify yourself, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Bertongen. Thank you for allowing me to comment. I will not repeat the concerns and comments of my other residents. I did look at the report and I applaud the staff for creating it. However, my concern remains that there's a lot of vague information and unsubstantiated assumptions. I'm looking, for instance, at page 52 to beyond, even though, when we were at the latest evacuation meeting, a whole bunch of areas or problems came up and there's still no solution. I'm talking about the other ones, the road requirements, trails, paths, and bicycle lanes. We still don't have a solution. We've been working on this for so many years. Utilities, it says in the text that the company has indicated it has sufficient capacity to meet the housing needs, but we don't have any evidence of that. And we have reported and submitted the photographs or outdated infrastructure. And so many people have spoken up and raised the concerns about the water quality, the water pressure, and even with the new building codes, even though that it says that the building codes are there to ensure the safety and improvements throughout the town, some of them are really a constraint and have actually made our condition worse. I think we should have a realistic concept, and that's what we have been trying to realize, and that's why we continue to speak up. And for some reason, that language seems to, and these concerns continue to be ignored. And this is now 5 years going on, and so I think we have to start working on it. Yeah, thank you. I'm very concerned. It's building new housing before addressing all the concerns we have not mentioned. We have insisted that those improvements get done before new housing comes in. So thank you.
You're on mute, Jocelyn.
Sorry, I had my cat in the room. Okay. Thank you for that, Caroline. I don't see any other questions from residents in town. So I'm going to take it back to Laura so you can address these issues that were raised.
Okay, great, thank you. In
Jocelyn?
regards, oh, I'm sorry, did someone else have something?
Oh, this is Ann. Could I add one more question onto the list before you answer that came up in the public's comments?
Go ahead.
I heard a few people talk about the ADUs in reference to Ford Field. My understanding was that no matter what number we came up with, no matter how high the number was for ADUs, that the state would not allow us to meet our housing obligations, especially the low income, with just ADUs. So I'd love to hear it addressed. My understanding was that the ADUs cannot save Ford Field from our development, that if people want to save Ford Field and use this little break we've put in, this sunrise time, they really need to think through other sites and brainstorm and maybe find a site that our committee didn't consider, and that's possibly could be substituted for Ford Field. If Laura or Jeff or Sarah could talk about that, I think it would be useful. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ann. All right, take it away, Laura.
Okay, so starting at the top of the public comments, in terms of the timing of the fire maps, I'm very worried too. I think about it all the time. I've been thinking about it all the time for a year. So I think we're all in good company in trying to work this out. The reality is that we have to plan for our housing element, even though we don't have the updated fire maps. I wish CAL FIRE would have finished them years ago when they said they were going to, and have already updated them again by now. So we are working off good information provided to us by professionals. And then when the updated fire maps are completed by the fire district or by CAL FIRE, whatever happens first, we just have to relook at them. And it could be at a bad time. And even if it's at a bad time, the town will have to reevaluate and make sure that there's not any policy changes that need to be made. It's just the reality of what we're working with. So questions about ADUs, it kind of is coming up in different ways. So some of this partially addresses Ann's comment and also the public comment. And the question is, do the units have to be, excuse me, occupied or rented out at a certain level? So this committee is familiar with the safe harbor that 21 Elements through the regional effort created for us, where we get the 30-30-30-10 split is what we've been talking about. So we are allowed to assign ADUs based on those assumptions. And in the housing element cycle that we're in now, we have been allowed by HCD to continue to use a similar approach in our annual reports. We do not think that for the next 8 years, we're going to be allowed to do that, to just automatically put it into the 30-30-30-10 split. We don't think that's going to continue. Either there'll be a legal issue with that, like the law will actually expressly change, or HCD will start enforcing it. They could start enforcing it on us at any time. And so I think they're going to require us to do the surveys that we have in the housing element, where we actually survey all of our ADU owners and find out how they're being rented at what income levels to substantiate our ADU production and rentals. So it's staff's belief that that is the direction we're going in, and we want to be prepared for that. We don't want to assume the assumption that says, 30-30-30-10 is going to work throughout the whole 8-year housing element cycle. So we're trying to be cautious in protecting the town from future problems with not meeting the RENA requirements. This committee has also discussed in quite a bit of depth this issue and this concern that creating additional ADUs could be used sometimes or all of the time just as more living area for the main house and not be used as a separate living unit. And so this committee has talked about that a lot, and staff understood the consensus of this committee is that ADUs are not sufficient to meet our lower income requirements technically, nor sort of ethically. That I thought this committee was saying it wasn't the right way to go because we didn't know if they were actually going to be produced and rented that way. So the other question was, does the state require subsidies? No, not necessarily, but we are going in that direction, that I think certainly by the end of the 8 years, we would have to have a subsidy program in place if we were relying on just ADUs. Some of our kind of sister towns that are more affluent communities are pushing the ADUs really hard, and we will hear back, through those communities and the comments that they get from HCD on that approach. There's a question related to Glen Oaks and the density requirement. And so the density for that site is changed from 8 units per acre down to 4 units per acre. And the question was, could the workers still live there if they were able to work that out between the owners and the tenants? And the answer is yes. If I understood your question correctly, our town policies would allow that if they were able to work it out. So if it's 4 units per acre, that would be a maximum. they could develop less units than that, and they could make them available at lower income levels. And that would be up to them to decide as a property owner and or the tenant in collaboration with the property owner. Question about Ford Field and how it qualifies as vacant, non-vacant. Unfortunately, my answer is this is a very poor part of the state law about what counts as vacant and non-vacant. And it's based on some past HCD interpretations. So when you see vacant and not vacant, you should not use logic. Like if you look at it and it looks vacant, it doesn't mean it's vacant to HCD. So just don't use logic. We checked with the law and we think we are submitting it according to the law. There's no better answer, unfortunately, for that. Related to raising money and would this be a parcel tax? There hasn't been any conversation about any kind of action like that. The way I understood the discussion was that it would be literal fundraising, like people giving money. If that were going to be the case. Question about state density bonus. We've talked about in this committee maybe 5 or 6 times. And at Ford Field, the town is the property owner. So no, it would not be possible to just increase the density by 80%. So that is not true. The town is the property owner and can control the density on that site with an affordable housing developer. There's a comment about the traffic study not being sufficient. The traffic study is not done and it has not been released yet. And so the traffic analysis is underway now and will be released with the CEQA document that's coming later this year. And then just thinking about Anne's comments at the end of the public comments or her questions, I think I started to answer this. It's our opinion, your technical team, that HCD will not accept a housing element from the town that only has ADUs to achieve the lower income units. This is our best advice that we can offer based on everything that we've learned. We don't speak for HCD. We're trying to represent the town's interest and interpret these laws and work with the professionals. So we do not think that that would be accepted. So can ADU save Ford Field in the biggest sense of the word? I don't think so. But maybe ADU production could be high enough that Ford Field could be designed differently. Or maybe the number of units could be reduced if it was done in collaboration with Ladera Church across the street. And so what it does do at least is to provide an opportunity for a holistic approach and not a piecemeal approach. But I don't think ADUs would be a feasible alternative from the information that's in front of us at this time.
Good. You done?
Yes, there was no closing statement. That's what I've got for you. Thank you.
It was abrupt.
I ran out of breath.
Yeah. Well, excellent job as always, and kind of summarizing and answering questions that are raised. Thank you for doing that so well. Okay. So I don't believe we need any discussion. Does the committee agree with me? Okay. Good. Thank you for agreeing with me. Laura, now we're going to move on to staff updates.
I'm sorry, Jocelyn, I
Yeah.
would like to make some comments.
Okay,
Is that right?
go ahead.
I'm still optimistic we can be done by 6:30.
Okay, I'm glad. Thank you.
I have 5 points actually. First, I love the idea of the ADU ambassadors, and I second Judith Murphy's plea to get started on that now. I think that's going to be really important for us. I want to make a point 2. I want to make a comment about what was in the report. It noted that there was a strong majority of the committee favored keeping the opt-in zoning. I think that's true, but it's worth noting that a strong majority of the community was opposed. And I didn't actually do the calculation, but my sense is roughly 7-1 were opposed by it, citing the marginal contribution and to satisfying RENA, but a disproportionate impact.
Bob, can you clarify what you're talking about? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I hear you.
In the report
Yeah.
that was presented in the agenda, with respect to the opt-in upzoning, it noted that
Opt-in.
strong majority of this committee
Mhm.
favored keeping it. And I was just contrasting with what we had heard from the public, both
Thank
here
you.
and in other meetings.
Thank you.
Point three, people are looking forward to the fire district map and new analysis, which I think is great. But it's clear from what Don Bullard said and Zeke Ludner both said that that new map is most likely to resemble Moritz's map. If anything, according to Zeke Ludner, there'll be more red. And so going from the 2008 CAL FIRE map to the new updated fire district map, I think will be very disruptive. And my opinion is it would make more sense to use what's documented in the current safety element, and then the incremental change when the district does its analysis and releases it will be more modest and easier to accommodate.
Can I just ask Laura to jump in on that?
Sure.
Laura, do you want to address that at all, or?
I think that the discussion is important for the safety element, but my opinion is that it's not important for the housing element because of the way that the sites have been selected and the information that this committee has already reviewed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The my fourth point might bear on what Laura just said, and that is I didn't learn this until reading Nancy Lund's book a couple years ago, but Portola Valley was a leader in seismic and geologic safety. It really invented the approach that was adopted by the state and beyond. And I don't doubt the intentions of everyone. I think intentions are good, but the fact is we're not leading in fire safety. We're falling behind, and it is important to this committee. It's very important because decisions and recommendations that were made by this committee, we heard explicitly by some committee members, were based on the premise that we've implemented best fire safety practices and we have an adequate evacuation plan. That was stated, that their recommendations are based on that understanding. But in fact, CAL FIRE has identified best practices in their risk reduction community criteria. There's 10 criteria. Portola Valley has done none. It's been 2 years since the CZU fire. We still don't have an evacuation plan. It's been 7 years since we received a template for a plan from the fire district. That hasn't been implemented. And I think it is important for this committee to understand that, because our recommendations by many of us were based on the premise that we are up to date. So my plea is, let's build the housing that's required. And while we're at it, let's do good by actually producing affordable housing, but let's do it while soberly addressing the very serious hazards we face, even if it's challenging. And then my final point, my fifth point is one I've made before, so I apologize if this is redundant, but the use of the 2008 CAL FIRE map, reminded me of this issue, and that is everyone on this committee is committed to complying with state law, state housing law, but there's other state law as well, including CEQA. And if the determination, it's hard to comment on an analysis that hasn't been made public, but if the determination of a mitigated negative declaration is based on data that includes the 2008 CAL FIRE map instead of what's currently in our safety element and what all fire safety authorities agree is the most accurate characterization of our hazard, then I worry, I worry that we're vulnerable to not satisfying CEQA. And I realize that's outside the scope of this committee, but I just want to communicate a request to staff that they consider that and discuss with the town council, because I think it's a potential vulnerability. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I sense a lot of anxiety around this, and I'm just not quite sure where it's coming from, because this is me speaking. It feels like we've spent hours and numerous meetings looking at the fire concerns and having different experts and looking at different sources and factoring that in and using the maps. And Laura said that with any updated fire information that we get, we're going to be updating the housing element committee, the housing element accordingly. So I guess I don't understand what the anxiety is about.
Is that a question for me, Jocelyn?
Sure.
Okay,
If
let
you
me
could
answer that.
clarify like what your actual concern is, I'd
So
love to
what
understand that.
prompted my question earlier and my comments now is seeing that the 2008 CAL FIRE map is what was incorporated in our housing element. We have discussed this before. What we heard earlier, as I mentioned, from Fire Marshal Bullard and the town safety consultant Zeke Ledner, was that the Moritz map was the most accurate. It understates our hazard, but it's the most accurate. And so my assumption was that, of course, that's what will be used.
Yeah. So Laura, I think you
And so
said
just to answer, Jocelyn, just to answer your question. And so
Yeah.
I was surprised when I saw that it was actually a 2008 CAL FIRE map. And that's what prompted my current bout of anxiety.
Okay, so I want to go back to Laura. Can you clarify for us, why we're on the right path and why you don't have the same sort of anxiety? Or do you?
I have slightly different anxiety.
Okay.
My anxiety is just how the timing of all of this has happened and the challenges related to that with the things that are outside of our control.
Yeah.
It is, I can tell you, amongst planners, it is very typical to include the CAL FIRE maps when you're doing constraints analysis, whether people think they're useful, whether people think they're timely. They are referenced in lots of policy documents and lots of guidelines and lots of recommendations about how to do professional planning. And so we would typically be remiss by not including them in something as we're discussing these things. It's just kind of how the profession works. And until new maps are coming out, they are still a map that is known and understood in the larger planning community. And so this is not to say that there's not interesting information in the Moritz map and that it's not a good map. It's not about that, but it's about kind of speaking the same language when we're explaining to HCD some of the things that we've talked about. So, it's if there's a map not in there, right, would we not be concerned? But there's a lot of things in our plan that we put in the plan because there's standard planning procedures and there's rules enforced by HCD. And this is a challenging, part of what we're doing in a process like this.
And I thought, in effect, by using Zeke's recommendations, which were more constrained than the maps, that, we sort of accounted for that.
Yes. And I hope that I have expressed that clearly, but we thought using Zeke's expertise, the feedback from the fire district that you got directly, the slopes, Zeke's individual site analysis, that we've gone above and beyond what would be included in any individual map by doing mapping and analysis.
Yeah. So it sounds like, Liz, like the factors we took into account, including Zeke, in coming up with our plan. And then there's what you are reporting to HCD in the plan, which is sort of like common parlance, and that's the CAL map, right?
Yeah,
so it's two different things, but in effect, what we've done is kind of the most conservative approach.
Yeah, we think we've gone above and beyond. But we're just putting kind of typical things to analyze in the plan. There's numerous.
So that's the language you're using because that's the language they speak. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And thanks for your questions, Bob. And your hand is up.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ping on this too and just ask Bob, surely you've been looking at the Moritz maps the whole time we've been doing this committee. What specific sites would you take off our current list and which sites would you add back? Because where I am, golly, we have done the sites we currently have are really good for earthquake, fire, evacuation. You can't do much better than pretty close to Alpine. In another context, I've heard you complain about stuff that we have a lot along Alpine, but it seems like if you're concerned about the fire map, why wouldn't you choose the what we have now? Or what specific sites would you add on there and take away what we currently have?
Well, CAL FIRE has a set of regulations that go with very high fire hazard severity zones. And so my approach would be, if we're going to satisfy our arena by building in the red, at a minimum, we should make sure we're satisfying CAL FIRE's requirements.
So our
And
current
so-
sites, you're
and
saying
so-
some of
so-
them are on the red
Yeah.
Moritz map.
Sorry, let me just finish. And so what I would argue is that not that we should necessarily exclude areas, but if we're going to build in these areas, we should build according to what are understood to be best practices in 2022. Now, will best practices be different 5 years from now? Probably, but we should at least implement that. That's what I'm saying. I'm sorry, I cut off your question.
Oh, are some of our current sites in the red Moritz sections?
I haven't done that analysis.
You haven't even looked at that, even though you love the Moritz map? Huh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna move on to,
I would also add that we don't know where the ADUs are going to be produced. And so, yeah, if we use my approach, Portola Valley would designate by ordinance the very high fire hazard severity zones, and CAL FIRE regulations would be implemented. And we construct with those safety practices.
okay. I'm gonna go on to Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn. Actually, Ann did such a good job with some of the points the questions and sort of points that I wanted to make. Ultimately, the map that's in the housing element, as I understand it from Laura, is really a placeholder. And the new maps, when they come out, are going to be used to make any necessary changes to the housing element. So I think we've spent an inordinate amount of time talking about something that ultimately I'm just not hearing anything that concerns me. And I do think I've thought about this, and I'm not avoiding this because it's, I think Bob said hard. It's not that it's not a hard decision. It's just that we don't yet have the key piece that's necessary, which is the new maps. So I guess I would be in favor of moving on from this subject.
I'd love to do that. Thank you. Again, I mean, I think Zeke in his constrained approach recommended, building on the corridors, and that's exactly what we did in our housing element. So I think we're consistent with that. I also feel very comfortable. Okay, good. I think we're done with that discussion. And if there's not anything else, I'll turn it back to Laura to go on to staff updates.
Thank you. Okay, so big things for folks to be aware of. I went over a lot of the details that I wanted you to know. I actually put that into the PowerPoint, but we are continuing to just work through the different resources being in the right place at the right time. So we have zoning code consultants that are coming on. Y'all remember Adrienne is on her maternity leave and she'll be back in the fall. And so we'll be working on the timing of that. And so we're continuing to work on our communications to the public so that people understand what we're doing. We know that it's hard to track. In particular, if you could help your friends and neighbors understand that there was a public review draft, that we had the 30-day comment period, that we received hundreds of pages of comments. They're all on the website. And then the council considered all of those comments and then formed the subcommittee to finalize the initial HCD draft. So as you're out talking to friends and neighbors, if you could help with that part of it, because people were already getting a lot of questions like what's included where? So if you could help point people to that, that would be really helpful in your role as committee members. And then as we're looking ahead and working on the schedule, we'll give you some updates so that you can try to plan from, fall into the holiday time. So please keep your eyes open for any of those emails that come from me and from my team as we continue to go forward. And then if anything big is changing on our side, we will let you know. So if we start to hear anything different, or we think that it's going to go different than the way I described to you this afternoon going into evening, then we'll give you an update. so that you and the public can anticipate what's coming next. So that's all I've got for you in terms of the staff update.
Great, thank you. And then there's next meeting dates, which you've already covered, right, earlier.
Yeah, and we'll send a follow-up email too, so you've got it in your email after the meeting.
Okay, sounds excellent. Good. I guess the last order of business is approving the minutes of June 20th. Can I have a motion to approve?
Maybe before we do that, you have one comment, had public comment, I think, possibly on the last item or two.
I wasn't sure. Are we still doing public comments at this point, Laura?
It is best to do if there's a public comment on my staff report.
Okay. So Christy Corley.
Staff report.
Comment on the staff report.
Yes, thank you. I want to understand the zoning, if you plan to, as your staff report, plan to zone each site within 1 to 3 years, or do you plan to zone each site by December and turn it into HCD? I just want to be clear because some cities are waiting a year to zone and you have up to 3 years to zone. So I just wanted to hear exactly when you want to complete the zoning on each of these sites, because it's very different. And then I never heard your answer on conservation easement on open space and why that wasn't done with Dorothy Ford Park. I don't think I heard that answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, I'll give it to you, Laura.
Okay, the previous council direction was to finish the zoning code amendments with the housing element by January 31st of 2023. The rationale for that is because it helps preserve local control for certain types of projects in certain situations. Now that we have our full draft housing element and we know where we've landed, our technical team is looking at those code amendments to determine exactly what needs to be done to preserve local control. And we'll be making proposals to proceed with just the things that really need to be done by January. So we'll be working on that part, and the Planning Commission will be the primary body to review those. So that is going to be upcoming. So hopefully that helps. We are not going to do what some cities are doing in terms of taking the either 1 year or 3 years. There's two different parts of the law because there's some consequences that could impact us. In terms of the conservation easement, I don't know. I was not here 50 years ago, so I can't speak to people's intent and why they adopted certain documents or not. So I just don't have an answer for that.
Great, thank you, Laura. Okay, so we'll go on to the minutes now. Can I have a motion to approve minutes of June 20th, 2022, please?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
A second.
Thank you. Do we need to
We need a roll call vote or
roll call?
We need public comments first. I do not see any hands up, but we should put that in the record.
Okay. All right, so no hands up on public comments.
And then, yes, let's do a roll call vote. Al Sill,
Aye.
Ann Koff-Sill,
Aye.
Bob Turcott,
Aye.
Andrew Pierce,
Andrew?
Aye. Sorry.
there we
Thank
go.
you.
Unmuting, thank you. Janie Ward,
Aye.
Sarah Wernickoff,
Aye.
Nicholas Targ,
Aye.
Jeff Alves,
aye.
Amy Armsby,
I'm going to abstain. I was not present.
okay, and Jocelyn MacArthur.
Aye. All right. Fantastic job again, Laura. Kudos in getting the plan submitted. We're looking forward to hearing comments in October, hopefully, as you had indicated, when we'll regroup. And thank you, everybody on the committee, for all your hard work and participating and being here tonight. We made great progress. We should be proud. Carla, thank you for participating again, and being here. So, all right, everybody, it's 6:30 on the dot. Great job. Have a good rest of the summer. We'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Meeting
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.